Hey guys, welcome back to Tap and Turn Gaming, and this is part 2 of my Sedris the Traitor King EDH deck tech. This is the part where I will go over each card in my deck with more in-depth analysis, tell you why I picked it, how it interacts well with other cards in the deck, and the overall win condition of this deck. So first, let's take a look at my commander. The Lord of Grixis himself, Sedris the Traitor King. He's a 6-cost 5/5 zombie warrior that makes it so that each creature card in your graveyard has Unearth for 2 colorless and a black. Essentially what Unearth is you can pay the Unearth cost of the creature in the graveyard and you return that card to play. I'm just going to read the rule texting. Return the card to play. The creature gains haste. Remove it from the game at end of turn, or if it would leave play. Unearth only as a sorcery. So, with this being a Reanimator type deck, I felt like Sedris would be a really good general to play. He has access to some pretty solid colors, blue and black and red. So yeah, I really enjoy playing this deck. If you like abusing the graveyard or even other people's graveyards, you should check this deck out. It might be, something that you would like to play if you like to abuse graveyards. But yeah, so that's my general, Sedris the Traitor King. He essentially, lets you reanimate creatures from your graveyard for a turn. The only real downfall to him is that, once you unearth a creature, if you use the ability on him, if you unearth it, at end of turn, or if it would leave play at any point, it gets exiled. But I do have a card in this deck that actually, as far as I've been told, bypasses that trigger, and that would let you keep the creatures that you unearth. So I will showcase that card once I get to it, but that's my general Sedris the Traitor King. First up, we'll take a look at my creature base, which is mostly the bread and butter of the deck. First up, we have Sheoldred Whispering One. Everybody knows what she does. She's a 7-cost 6/6 with Swamp Walk, which is pretty cool. But at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. So she's a free res from your graveyard on your upkeep, and everybody else on their upkeep has to pick and dump a guy in the graveyard. So she's a really good fit. Not only does she essentially reanimate things from your graveyard every turn, she also stockpiles your opponent's graveyards with creatures that you can potentially steal from their graveyard later on. So she's just, I feel like if you're playing black, you should be playing her anyways, but she's just a really good fit for this Reanimator style deck. Next we have Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur. He's a 10-cost 5/4 with Flash. If you saw my cycle review for the Praetors, you would have seen that I ranked this guy number 4 out of the 5 Praetors. But in this type of deck, he's a house. Basically, if I can get this guy reanimated onto the board by like turn 3, which is entirely possible for me to do, or even by turn 2, I essentially just won the game. If I like turn 1, if I play a black and cast Entomb and search for this guy, dump him in the graveyard, and then on my second turn, play a Reanimate and reanimate him from the graveyard, there's not much your opponents are going to be able to do to deal with that. Because now, every end step, you're going to draw 7 cards. So, more than likely, you're going to be dumping a lot of cards in your graveyard, because your maximum hand size is more than likely going to be 7. But your opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. So it's essentially 0. So if you get this guy reanimated on the board by like turn 2 or turn 3, you essentially just won the game. So, he's in there for that. Even if you don't reanimate him really early in the game, he's just really good to reanimate, because not only will he let you stockpile your graveyard by discarding cards at the end of your turn because your maximum hand size is only 7, granted that you have 7 cards in your hand. Even if you don't, you know, just being able to draw 7 cards is really good. But he will also stockpile your opponent's graveyards because any cards that they have in their hand, if they don't play it on their turn, it goes into the graveyard because their hand size is basically 0. Next we have Deadeye Navigator. He's a 6-cost 5/5 with Soul Bond. Basically what Soul Bond is I'm just going to read the rule texting. You may pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enters the battlefield. They remain paired for as long as you control both of them. So essentially, if you have this guy on the board and then you cast another creature and the creature resolves, you can pair that creature with Deadeye Navigator. And then his second ability reads, as long as Deadeye Navigator is paired with another creature, each of those creatures has pay a colorless and a blue, exile this creature, then return it to the battlefield under your control. So essentially, he lets you just blink creatures out repeatedly. You can actually blink himself out if you cast a new creature that you now want to have paired with Deadeye Navigator. You could, you know, as long as Deadeye Navigator is paired with another creature, you could blink Deadeye Navigator out, put him back in, and then pair him with the new creature that you want him paired with. He's really, really good with creatures with enters the battlefield abilities. Next we have Vela the Nightclad. She's a 6-cost 4/4 with Intimidate, which is pretty cool. Other creatures you control have Intimidate, which is really, really cool. And then whenever Vela the Nightclad or another creature you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So if you have this girl on the board and someone does a board wipe, your opponents are going to lose a ton of life. If you have Sedris on the board too, and you do like a mass unearth, you know, if you generate a bunch of black mana with, like, you know, Cabal Coffers, if you have an Urborg down, generate a bunch of black, you know, unearth a crap ton of creatures from your graveyard, and then they're going to all leave play at the end of your turn. Everybody's going to lose a ton of life. So I just feel like she's a really good card for this deck overall. Just the amount of creatures that do leave play in Commander, whether they're killed or exiled or, you know, someone casts a Damnation, whatever it may be, she's going to drain your opponents for a lot of life. Next we have Corpse Connoisseur. He's a 5-cost 3/3. When he comes into play, you may search your library for a creature card and put that card into your graveyard. If you do, shuffle your library. So he's essentially there to you know, get me some value into my graveyard so I can reanimate it with, you know, another creature or another spell or even Sedris. And he himself actually has Unearth for 3 colorless and a black. So if I do cast him, I can fetch a creature, dump it in the yard to reanimate, and then, you know, if he dies, I can unearth him to do it again. So he gets me 2 creatures into the graveyard for me to recur. Next we have Kiki-Jiki, Mirror Breaker. Everybody knows what this does. You know, I'll generally use him to make copies of creatures with enters the battlefield abilities. Normally he's, well, maybe not normally, but a lot of times you'll see this guy used in like infinite combos in certain decks. As far as I know, I don't have an infinite combo with him in this deck. I mean, I may not. I'm not really too much of a combo player myself, but there's no denying this guy's really, really, really good. And I do have a lot of enters the battlefield abilities on creatures in this deck, so, you know, I just felt like he was a really good fit. Next we have River Kelpie. He's a 5-cost 3/3. Whenever River Kelpie or another permanent is put into play from a graveyard, draw a card. So essentially, whenever I reanimate something, I get to draw a card. Then whenever a spell is played from a graveyard, draw a card. So like if someone, you know, flashes back a spell, if they have a spell with flashback, or, you know, anything like that. Whenever a spell is played from a graveyard, you get to draw a card as well. And he has Persist, so, you know, when he dies, he comes back. as a 2/2. He comes back with a -1/-1 counter on him. So basically, if he dies, you'll draw a card because he hit the graveyard. Actually, no, I'm sorry. It's whenever another permanent is put into play from a graveyard, I'm sorry. But, you know, the fact that he has Persist is really cool. You know, creatures that bring themselves back, basically reanimate themselves, are just, you know, really good. And next we have Extractor Demon. He's a 6-cost 5/5 flyer. Whenever another creature leaves the battlefield, you may have target player put the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So basically, he's here to stockpile everybody's graveyard for more options for me to reanimate. So whenever another creature dies or gets exiled, whatever, I can have somebody mill the top 2 cards of their deck, and then that's just more value for me to reanimate something from their graveyard if it happens to be creatures. And he also has Unearth himself as well for 2 colorless and a black. So, you know, if he dies, I can Unearth him and, you know, do something in that turn to make a bunch of creatures leave play. He'll mill, you know, cards from people's decks, and then that'll just have me have more options in everybody's graveyard to potentially reanimate something. Next we have Consuming Aberration. He's a 5-cost horror creature. His power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. So, I mean, with this being a Reanimator deck, you know, I'm going to make cards hit the graveyard so I can reanimate them, whether it be from mine or from my opponent's. His power and toughness are only equal to the cards in my opponent's graveyards, but irregardless, this guy can get really, really huge, really quick. And he also reads, whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land card. Then puts those cards into his or her graveyards. Every time you cast something, everybody mills, all your opponents mill until they hit a land. I've had this guy, in a one-on-one game, I've had this guy mill somebody for 10 in a single turn because they didn't hit a land until the 10th card from the top of their deck. So this guy can get really, really big really quick. And he also stockpiles your opponent's graveyards every time you cast a spell. So just pure value in this style of deck. Next we have Archaeomancer. He's a 4-cost 1/2. When he enters the battlefield, return and target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. You know, pretty self-explanatory. He'll recur my reanimation spells, my kill spells, whatever it may be. And if I have him paired with Deadeye Navigator, I can keep getting spells back. Next we have Grave Titan. Everybody knows what this guy does. 6-cost 6/6 with Death Touch every time he... or when he enters the battlefield, and every time he attacks, you get 2 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the field. So he's always just a constant threat. You know, so I just feel like he's a really good, you know, card to be aggressive in this deck. You know, he's got Death Touch, so, you know, it might make your opponents think twice about blocking him or attacking into you. Next we have Undead Gladiator. He's a 3-cost 3/1, where you can pay 2, discard a card from your hand, and return Undead Gladiator from your graveyard to your hand. You only get to play that ability during your upkeep, but he has cycling for a colorless and a black. So if I have him in my hand, I can cycle him to draw a card. Then I can pay 2, dump a creature card that I want to reanimate into my graveyard, get him back, and then keep cycling him. So he's card advantage, and he allows me to stockpile my graveyard with big nasties that I want to reanimate. Next we have Solemn Simulacrum. Everybody knows what this does. When he comes into play, search your deck for a basic land card, put it in onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your deck, and then when he dies, you draw a card. Next we have Skirk Exhumer. He's a 2-cost 1/1, where you can pay a black and tap him and discard a card to get a 1/1 black zombie goblin creature token named Festering Goblin. And then Festering Goblin has, when it's put into a graveyard from play, target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So he's potential creature removal, and he lets me dump cards in the graveyard to reanimate. Next we have Phyrexian Metamorph, 4-cost clone. He actually does have a Phyrexian blue mana symbol, so you can either pay for that cost with a blue mana or 2 life. So he can potentially only cost you 3 colorless mana to play, and then 2 life. But he's essentially a clone, but he can also clone an artifact. You may have Phyrexian Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other type. So he's basically like clone, but he can also clone artifacts. Next we have Phyrexian Delver, a 5-cost 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You lose life equal to that card's converted mana cost. So yeah, I play him, he comes into play. I get to reanimate a creature from my graveyard. Pretty self-explanatory. Next we have Fleshbag Marauder. He's a 3-cost 3/1. When he enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Generally, when I cast him, I'm probably going to sacrifice him himself to his own ability. But, this is just a way to get creatures in everybody's graveyard for me to have more options to reanimate later on. Next we have Sepulchral Primordial. He's a 7-cost 5/4 with Intimidate, which is pretty cool. But where he really shines is when he enters the battlefield. For each opponent, you may put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So he's mass reanimation from all of my opponent's graveyards. So, if you're playing a 4-player game and you have 3 opponents, he's going to res 3 creatures. 4 opponents, 4 creatures, you get the idea. He's really, really good in EDH, especially in a Reanimator deck, because that's basically what he does, is he reanimates things. Next we have Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni. She's a 6-cost 5/4 with Ninjutsu. Basically what Ninjutsu is when you declare your attack step and you attack with some creatures. If a creature among those goes unblocked, you can pay this card's Ninjutsu cost, which is 3 colorless and 2 black, and you basically swap the attacking creature with this creature. Just to read the rule texting, it says, return an unblocked attacker you control to hand, put this card onto the battlefield from your hand, tapped and attacking. So basically it just swaps out for an unblocked creature, and this will hit your opponent instead of the other creature that that just went through. But where she is really good is whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you may put target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So, if you get tricky and you attack with something, it goes unblocked, you ninjutsu this in for 5, you get to res a creature from that opponent's graveyard, and she's just a constant threat. She also has Regenerate for a colorless and a black, so you're more than likely just going to keep attacking with her every turn, and she's just going to be a constant threat to your opponent. Next we have Havengul Lich. He's a 5-cost 4/4, where you can pay 1 colorless, and it says you may cast target creature card from a graveyard this turn. When you cast that card this turn, Havengul Lich gains all activated abilities of that card until end of turn. So he's really cool. I guess he's not so much reanimation. You do have to essentially cast the creature from the graveyard. It can be anybody's graveyard, but, if someone is playing, this deck is Grixis colored, blue, black, red. If someone's playing like a mono white deck, you'll never reanimate anything from their deck, as long as it, costs white to play it. But he's really cool, and the fact that he gains all activated abilities of the card that you cast is pretty sweet as well. So, if you, pay 1 and then you cast a Kiki-Jiki from somebody's graveyard, now you have essentially 2 Kiki-Jikis that you can use to make copies of things. So he's pretty cool. I really like him in this deck. Next we have Body Double. It's a 5-cost clone. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature card in a graveyard. So, if I'm stockpiling everybody's graveyards with some of the stuff that you've seen in this deck, You know, I can drop this and make this come into play as a copy of any creature in any graveyard, so it's a really good fit for this deck. Next we have Geth, Lord of the Vault, my foil Geth, Lord of the Vault. It's a 6-cost 5/5 with Intimidate. And his ability reads, you can pay a black and X and put target artifact or creature card with converted mana cost X from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped. Then that player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So not only is this guy a 5/5 with Intimidate that you can potentially beat face with every turn, he will reanimate artifacts or creatures from your opponent's graveyards, and then whatever you pay for X, you can res an artifact or a creature from that graveyard with that converted mana cost of X. And then also, whatever X is, that opponent mills that many cards from the top of their deck. So not only does he reanimate things to your side of the board, he stockpiles that opponent's graveyard even more for you to have more choices to reanimate things later on. So he's really, really good in this deck. Next we have Phyrexian Plaguelord. He's a 5-cost 4/4 where you can tap him and sacrifice him to give target creature -4/-4 until end of turn. Also, he is a free sacrifice outlet. You can sacrifice a creature and target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. He's pretty much in here just for the free sacrifice outlet, but it is nice to, you know, he can potentially remove creatures if you tap him and sacrifice himself to give something a -4/-4, or if you have a lot of creatures on the board, let's say you reanimate some of your opponent's creatures, then you use those creatures to dump into his ability to kill something. So, you know, more or less he's here for the sacrifice outlet, but, you know, he is potential creature removal as well, to get creatures in the graveyard and then for you to reanimate. Next we have Evil Twin. It's a 4-cost clone. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it gains pay a blue and a black and tap it to destroy target creature with the same name as this creature. So it's essentially a clone, but it has the built-in ability where you can pay a blue and a black and tap it to destroy the creature that you cloned, essentially. Next we have Inferno Titan. You know, 6-cost 6/6 with fire breathing. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures and or players. You know, so he's more or less there just for the sheer amount of damage that he can output. You know, he can potentially remove creatures. You know, if he hits your opponent, you can dump extra mana into him to make him hit harder. You know, he's just an overall really good red card to play. Next we have Phyrexian Ingester. He's a 7-cost 3/3 with Imprint. When he enters the battlefield, you may exile target non-token creature. And then Phyrexian Ingester gets +X/+Y, where X is the exiled creature's power and Y is its toughness. This may seem like an oddball card for this deck, seeing as it's a reanimator style deck, but if there's a creature that your opponent has that you just need to get rid of, you don't want to see it anymore, this guy will get rid of it forever. And you know, if you pair this guy with Deadeye Navigator, you can start exiling things all day long. Next we have Skinrender. He's a 4-cost 3/3. When he enters the battlefield, put 3 -1/-1 counters on target creature. So he's essentially there just as creature removal. Same thing here, Bogard and Hellkite. He's an 8-cost 5/5 with Flash and Flying. But when he enters the battlefield, he deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. So if I reanimate this guy for cheap, he's going to deal 5 damage however I want it divided among creatures or players. So he's a really good reanimation target. You know, you could deal 5 damage to an opponent's face, you could deal 5 damage to a creature, you could deal 2 damage to a creature, and then 3 damage to your opponent, however you want to divide it up. So he's a really good reanimation target. Next we have Flametongue Kavu, a 4-cost 4/2. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to target creature. So more or less, it's just here for creature removal. Next we have Massacre Worm. He's a 6-cost 6/5. When he enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, that player loses 2 life. This guy can potentially win you games if you're playing against somebody that's playing a token deck and you drop this guy and you nuke all their tokens and then they're going to lose 2 life for every token. That's probably going to kill them. I have actually won games off of this guy, just dropping this guy when your opponent's playing tokens, but he's more or less here for creature removal. You know, -2/-2 is pretty solid, you know, -- that you can give a creature, but for every creature that dies while he's on the board, they're going to lose 2 life. So, you know, every time you kill a creature, your opponent is going to lose life. So he's a really good fit for this deck. Next we have Avatar of Woe. It's a 8-cost 6/5 with Fear. It's got the old rule texting on it. It says it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or black creatures. That's called Fear. But also it says if there are 10 or more creature cards total in all graveyards, Avatar of Woe costs 6 colorless less to play. So, more than likely you're going to end up casting this card for just double black, because, you know, with the amount of stuff that you have, or that I have in this deck that stockpiles my graveyard and everybody else's graveyard, there's going to be 10 creature cards in all graveyards, so you're more than likely going to be able to play this for double black. And then she is creature kill. You can tap her to destroy target creature and it can't be regenerated. So this is just a really good card for a reanimation style deck. You know, like I said, there's always going to be more than 10 creatures in everybody's graveyard in total. So, you know, this is more than likely going to cost you double black, and it's creature kill just by simply tapping it. Here's some more creature kill in Shriekmaw. He's a 5-cost 3/2 with Fear. When he comes into play, destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. So he's essentially a terror on a body. But generally I don't play him for his actual mana cost. Most of the time I will evoke him, because he has an evoke cost of a colorless and a black, the same as Terror. So when you evoke something, it comes into play and then it's immediately sacrificed, but it triggers its enter the battlefield ability. So he's essentially creature kill. Same thing here with Nekrataal. He's a 4-cost 2/1 with First Strike. When he comes into play, destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. That creature can't be regenerated. So kind of the same deal as Shriekmaw, just without the evoke. But he does have the can't be regenerated clause, so he's just more creature kill. You know, to stockpile your opponent's graveyards and reanimate stuff. And lastly, for the creatures, we have Dark Hatchling. It's a 6-cost 3/3 flyer. Essentially the same thing as Nekrataal, just a 3/3 flyer without First Strike. You know, more creature kill. Okay, so that is the creature base of the deck. Next, I will go into the, let's go into the artifacts and enchantments. First up are the enchantments. Here we have Warstorm Surge. It's a 6-cost red enchantment, which says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So if you have this on the board and then you start, you know, mass reanimating things, not only are you going to get creatures on your side of the board, but they're going to deal damage equal to their power to a creature or a player. So it's just a really good red enchantment. Next we have Whip of Erebos. It's a 4-cost enchantment artifact, which gives creatures you control lifelink, which is pretty cool. But you can pay 2 colorless and a black to tap this to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. Activate this ability only time you could cast a sorcery. So it's kind of like an unearth, you know, artifact that you can unearth creatures from your graveyard. It's not exactly the same, but, you know, it essentially is. You know, it just lets you reanimate a creature from your graveyard for a turn, for 2 colorless and a black. You know, the creature gains haste, and then if it would leave play or at the end of your turn, it gets exiled. So if you just need a creature on the if you need a creature on the board from your graveyard, you know, in that turn that could potentially swing the game in your favor or potentially win you the game, this card will do that for you. Next we have Rooftop Storm. It's a 6-cost blue enchantment where it says you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for zombie creature spells you cast. Mainly this is in here for Sedris. You know, if Sedris starts getting high up there on the additional general cost, if I drop this, I can just keep paying him for 0. So that's more or less why this is in here. I do run, I think, about maybe 6 or 7 other zombies in the 99 of this deck. So, you know, it's an overall pretty good card. You know, if I want to keep getting Sedris out on the board to unearth things, this will just let me cast him for 0. Next we have Dictate of Erebos. It's essentially a Grave Pact with Flash, and it costs 1 additional mana. That's basically what it is. It's Grave Pact just with Flash. So, you know, if someone goes to do a board wipe, if you have this in your hand, you can be tricky and flash it in and then make the board wipe hurt for them too. Here we have Attrition. It's a 3-cost black enchantment where you can pay a black and sacrifice a creature to destroy target non-black creature. So this is mainly just in here for creature kill. You know, I can sacrifice one of my creatures to kill one of their creatures, and then I can reanimate the creature I sacrificed or reanimate the creature that I killed. Granted that it's not black. So this is pretty solid black removal. Next we have my favorite artifact in the deck, Strionic Resonator. It's a 2-cost artifact where you can pay 2 and tap it to copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. This card is absolutely bananas. Just the amount of things that you can do with this. You can essentially copy every single one of your enters the battlefield abilities. You know, just to kind of go through them. You know, I could copy Dark Hatchlings come into play to blow up a creature. I could copy Nekrataals to blow up a creature. I could copy Shriekmaws to blow up a creature. You know, I could copy Massacre Worms -2/-2 to essentially turn it into -4/-4. I could copy Flametongue Kavu's enters the battlefield to deal 8 damage. I could copy Bogarden Hellkite's enters the battlefield ability to deal 10 damage. You get the idea. I'm not going to go through all the creatures, you know, in my deck that you could copy abilities on, but you get the idea with this card. It lets you copy all your enters the battlefield abilities. It will, you know, let you copy anything that's a triggered ability. But mainly where it shines in this deck is where all the enters the battlefield abilities that I have on my creatures. So this card, I love this card. It's just so good. Next we have Nim Deathmantle. It's a 2-cost artifact. It's an equipment. It costs 4 colorless to equip. Generally, I never actually equip it to a creature by paying its equip cost, but it says equipped creature gets +2/+2, has Intimidate, and is a black zombie. But where this card is really good is that it says whenever a non-token creature is put in your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4 colorless. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. So whenever one of your creatures dies, if you immediately want to get it back and you have 4 colorless mana available, you can invest into this card and basically just get that creature immediately back into play, and then this becomes attached to it. So it becomes bigger, meaner, nastier. I think this card is a very underrated card. I don't see it played in a lot of decks, and it kind of confuses me a little bit. I think it's a really good recursion card. Here is the card that I spoke of at the beginning of the video that I have been told will negate the unearth trigger of the creatures being exiled if they would leave play or at the end of your turn. This is Sundial of the Infinite. It's a 2-cost artifact where you can pay 1 colorless and tap it to end the turn. Activate this ability only during your turn. And then in the rule texting it says, exile all spells and abilities on the stack, discard down to your maximum hand size, damage wears off, and this turn, and until end of turn effects end. So I think that's where it overrides the unearth trigger of the creatures being exiled. At least that's what I've been told. If I'm wrong, or if what I've been told is wrong, rather, leave a comment in the comment section below this video and let me know, because if that's the case, this card will get cut out of the deck. But that is why this card is in there, is because I've been told that this negates the trigger of the creatures being exiled when you unearth them. Next we have Expedition Map. It's a 1-cost artifact where you can pay 2 colorless and tap it and sacrifice it to search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. More often than not, if I crack this, I'm going to be searching for a Crypt of Agadeem, or, you know, if I have a Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth on the board, I'll search for Cabal Coffers, you know, just to get that huge black mana ramp. I really like using this with Crypt of Agadeem, because if I have a bunch of creature cards in my graveyard that are black, it will get me that much black mana. Kind of the same thing with Urborg, you know, with Urborg and Cabal Coffers, rather. You know, because Urborg makes all of your land swamps in addition to what else they are, and then Cabal Coffers, as a lot of you know, you can pay 2 colorless and tap it to add black to your mana pool for each swamp you control. So, you know, those 2 cards are really good together. So most of the time, Expedition Map will either fetch me up a Urborg, a Cabal Coffers, or a Crypt of Agadeem. You know, so if you generate all that black mana, you get Sedris on the board, you can just start unearthing things like crazy. Here we have Ashnod's Altar. It's a 3-cost artifact where you can pay 0, sacrifice a creature to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Mainly this is in here for the free sacrifice outlet, but it is nice, you know, to be able to sacrifice a creature to mana ramp, basically. You know, so if you're trying to dump a bunch of mana into maybe like a huge Profane Command or something like that, or even, you know, get the 2 colorless to start unearthing things from your graveyard, just a really good artifact. I play it in just about every deck I have. Here we have Mimic Vat. It's a 3-cost artifact with Imprint. Whenever a non-token creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may exile that card. If you do, return each other card exiled with Mimic Vat to its owner's graveyard. So basically, if a creature dies, if it goes to any graveyard, you can imprint that creature onto this artifact. And then if you change your mind, and another creature dies that you want to imprint on this, the previously imprinted creature goes to its owner's graveyard. But where this card is really good is you can pay 3 and tap it to put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of the exiled card. It gains haste, exiled at the beginning of the next end step. So if you're, you know, killing some of your opponent's creatures, or if they happen to discard, you know, some creatures into their graveyard, maybe, you know, something really good that you want to continuously make tokens of every turn, this card will let you do that. It also makes it so that the card becomes exiled, so your opponents can't, you know, if you do choose to target a card that's in your opponent's graveyard, they basically can't ever use it again, as long as it's imprinted on this artifact. But it's more or less just, you know, putting creature tokens into play that are copies of whatever creature that you imprint onto this. And lastly, we have Minion Reflector. It's a 5-cost artifact. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 colorless. If you do, put a token into play that's a copy of that creature. That token has haste, and at end of turn, sacrifice is permanent. So basically it's there, you know, if you start reanimating things, you can pay, you know, 2 colorless and get a copy of what you just reanimated. You know, getting copies of big nasty creatures is always nice. Okay, so that is the artifacts and enchantments of the deck. Next we will look at the instants and sorceries. First we'll look at my tutor package. First we have Demonic Collusion. It's a 5-cost sorcery. You know, lets you tutor up a card to your hand. But it does have buyback of discard 2 cards. So this is a really good tutor for this deck in particular. Because, you know, you want to be dumping cards in your graveyard to reanimate them. So paying the buyback cost on this card is beneficial to you. So you pay 5, tutor up a card, discard 2 cards. as you're casting it to buy it back, and then you can cast it again. So, you know, you're not only tutoring up cards that you want and or need, but you're stockpiling your graveyard for reanimation. Next we have Increasing Ambition. It's also a 5-cost tutor. You know, search your deck for a card, put it in your hand. But if you flash it back, its flashback cost is 8. But if you do flash it back, you get to tutor for 2 cards. Put them in your hand. So I personally really like this tutor. Being able to tutor for a card is good. Being able to tutor for 2 cards is really good. You know, just the fact that this has flashback, you know, if you cast this earlier in the game, and then later on in the game, if you need an answer to something, you can flash this back and get that answer and an additional card. So I just think this is a really good tutor. And then lastly, Diabolic Tutor, 4 cost, you know, search your deck for a card and put it in your hand. I actually don't run a Demonic Tutor in this deck just because I have yet to acquire one. I do plan on acquiring one at some point, I just don't know when that'll be. Next we'll look at the sweepers I play. I only run 2. I run Plague Wind. It's a 9-cost black sorcery. Destroy all creatures you don't control. They can't be regenerated. I do want to maybe replace this with an Ingarrick's Wake, just because it'll also blow up every opponent's planeswalkers if they have any. Yeah, it doesn't have the can't be regenerated clause, but most of the time I don't really have to worry about that. So that's Plague Wind. And Blasphemous Act. 9-cost red sorcery that costs 1 colorless less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. So a lot of the times I'll cast this for a single red mana if there are a ton of creatures on the board. And then it deals 13 damage to each creature. Not a lot of creatures are going to survive 13 damage unless they're indestructible or something like that. Okay, now we will look at the remainder of the instants and sorceries of my deck. First up we have Reanimate. That's what this deck is all about, is reanimation, so I had to play this card. It's a 1-cost black sorcery. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Yeah, you lose life equal to its cost, but you know, if you reanimate, like I said, I believe at the beginning of the video when we saw Jin-Gitaxias, you know, if I have this and like an Entomb or even a Buried Alive in my opening hand, you know, turn 1 I can, you know, if I have the Entomb, I can cast Entomb, search for Jin-Gitaxias, dump him in the graveyard. Turn 2, reanimate him onto the board, and at that point I basically just won the game. There's nothing that your opponents are really going to be able to do on like turn 2 or turn 3 to deal with Jin-Gitaxias, and at the end of their turn they dump every card in their hand into their graveyard because their maximum hand size is basically 0. So this is, you know, it's a Reanimator style deck, so just have to play Reanimate. Next we have Cyclonic Rift. It's a 2-cost blue instant, which reads, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. And then it also has Overload for 6 colorless and a blue. When you overload a spell, it replaces all the instances of the word, what does it say? You may cast a spell for its overload cost. If you do, change its text by replacing all instances of target with each. Sorry, I just had a brain fart there. So when you overload a card, basically it turns it so that instead of it's reading target, it reads each. So if you overload this, it reads return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. So it's a one-sided board wipe. Next we have Entomb. Previously mentioned how it works well with Reanimate. 1-cost black instant. The fact that this is an instant is really good. You know, search your deck for a card, put it in your graveyard, then shuffle your deck. You know, so I want cards to go to the graveyard. You know, I could use this at instant speed to get something in the graveyard and then reanimate it, you know, that turn. So it's just a really good fit for this deck. Next we have Traumatize. It's a 5-cost blue sorcery. Target player puts the top half of his or her library rounded down into his or her graveyard. This is a really mean card. It will stockpile your opponent's graveyards if you target them. Basically cuts their deck in half, and the top half goes in their graveyard. You can potentially target yourself with this because it says target player. So if you want to get a bunch of creatures in your graveyard to reanimate, you know, if you have a Sedris on the board and maybe you have a Crypt of Agadeem on the board as well, and you cast Traumatize on yourself, and you potentially get a ton of black creature cards into your graveyard from what you just milled. You know, you can activate your Crypt of Agadeem for a bunch of black mana and then start unearthing things with Sedris. So this is a really good card for this deck. Next we have Beacon of Unrest. It's a 5-cost black sorcery. Put target artifact or creature card in a graveyard into play under your control, and then this gets shuffled into your library. So this never really hits your graveyard, so you can potentially keep drawing into this and reanimating things, whether it be a creature or an artifact. And it's from any graveyard. Doesn't have to be yours. Next we have Buried Alive, pretty similar to Entomb, except it costs 3 and it's a sorcery, but you get to search your library for up to 3 creature cards and put them into your graveyard, and then shuffle your library afterwards. So, you know, just another spell to get creatures in my graveyard to reanimate. Next we have Profane Command. It's a black sorcery that costs 2 black and X, which allows you to choose 2 of the following modes. Target player loses X life, or return target creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to play, or target creature gets -X until end of turn, or up to X target creatures gain fear until end of turn. This is a really, really good card. Most of the time, one of the 2 modes I'm going to be picking is the reanimation of returning a card with converted mana cost X or less from my graveyard to play. But, you know, just having those 3 other options of having someone lose X life, or giving a creature a -/, or giving a bunch of creatures fear to get in for potentially lethal damage, just the amount of options this card gives you is just so good. But most of the time, one of the 2 modes I'm going to pick is the reanimation mode. Next we have Dreadbore. 2-cost sorcery, costs a black and a red, destroy target creature or planeswalker. More or less just spot removal for pesky creatures or planeswalkers. And lastly, we have Croesus's Charm. It costs a blue, a black, and a red. It's an instant, which is nice, and you get to choose one of the following: return target permanent to its owner's hand, or destroy target non-black creature, and it can't be regenerated, or destroy target artifact. So just having those options, you know, to pick from. If, you know, someone has a permanent that you want to bounce to get out of the way, you can do that. If you want to blow up a non-black creature, you can do that. If your opponent has a pesky artifact that's giving you problems, you can blow it up. So, you know, a 3-cost spell with 3 different things that you can use it for is just really nice. Okay, so that is the instants and sorceries that I run in the deck. Next we'll look at the 2 planeswalkers I run. The first one is Ashiok Nightmare Weaver. He costs 3, a colorless, a blue, and a black. His first ability, also he comes into play with 3 loyalty counters. But his first ability is to add 2 loyalty counters to exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. That may seem like a silly thing to do in a reanimation style deck, but we'll take a look at his second ability, which is -X. Put a creature card with converted mana cost X, exiled with Ashiok Nightmare Weaver, onto the battlefield under your control. That creature is a nightmare in addition to its other types. So, you know, he will exile cards from your opponent's library, and then once he starts getting up there with his loyalty counters, he can potentially reanimate creatures from their graveyard. I'm sorry, not from the graveyard. Reanimate creatures that he exiled. So, you know, that's just more reanimation, and he fits in the colors of the deck. And then his last ability is -10, exile all cards from all opponents' hands and graveyards. So if you, you know, establish a pretty heavy board presence, you know, and then you ultimate him and exile everybody's hand and graveyard, there's not much they're going to be able to do to stop you at that point. So, So I just think he's a really cool card for this deck. Yeah, he exiles cards from your opponent's library, but his second ability allows you to reanimate things, reanimate creatures that he exiled. So he just fit the theme for this deck, and I just really like him. And lastly, Liliana Vess, my foil Liliana Vess. 5 cost, Planeswalker. Everybody knows what this does. Comes into play with 5 loyalty counters. You can +1 to make someone discard a card. You can -2 to search your library for a card and then put it on top of your deck. Or you can -8 to Rise of the Dark Realms, basically. Put all creature cards and all graveyards into play under your control. So, she will fill your opponent's graveyards, she'll let you tutor for cards, and she'll let you mass reanimate all creature cards from all graveyards. So she just fit the theme so well for this deck. Okay, and lastly, I want to talk a little bit about some of the, what I like to call tech lands that I run in this deck. First up is Thespian Stage. It's a colorless land that taps for a colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it to make it become a copy of target land, and it gains this ability. So mainly this is in here, to copy like a Cabal Coffers if I have an Urborg down, which makes all my lands swamps in addition to what else they are. Or if I have a Crypt of Agadeem down. I'll make this a copy of either one of those lands and just start producing a boatload of black mana. Halimar Depths, just let you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. Nothing special there. Bajuka Bog, if you're playing black, you should probably be playing this land. Yeah, my deck's a Reanimator style deck and I want things to hit the graveyard, but if it just gets to the point where I just need someone's graveyard to just go away, this land will let you do that. Next we have Desolate Lighthouse. It's a colorless land that taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay 1 colorless, a blue and a red, to tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. So it's card advantage and stockpiles your graveyard for potential reanimation. So just a really good land that fits very well in this deck. Here's Crypt of Agadeem. Comes into play tapped. You can tap it for a black, or you can pay 2 and tap it to add black to your mana pool for each black creature card in your graveyard. So it's kind of like Cabal Coffers, just for the amount of black creature cards that are in your graveyard. So this is one of the targets that I'll usually hit with Thespian Stage. Also, I really like to have this land on the board. If I'm going to cast, Sedris, I really like to have this on the board and have a bunch of black creature cards in my graveyard so I can just unearth a lot of things in a single turn. And then, if I have like a Warstorm Surge down, I could potentially, kill somebody by unearthing all the creatures and then having Warstorm Surge trigger and deal damage to my opponent. Here's Teleria West. Comes into play tapped. It taps for a blue, or I can transmute it for a colorless and 2 blue. Basically, transmuting a land will let you search for a 0-cost card. So basically, this land lets me tutor for Crypt of Agadeem or Cabal Coffers or any... Basically, this is a land tutor if I transmute it. And more often than not, I will transmute this to get a Crypt of Agadeem. Most of the time, it may be a Cabal Coffers or an Urborg if I, have either one of those down as well. But most of the time, this will transmute for a Crypt of Agadeem. Next we have Kur Keep, colorless legendary land. It taps for a colorless, or you can pay a colorless and a red and tap it to get a 0/1 red kobold. If you desperately need blockers to stop your opponent's creatures, this land will, produce chump blockers for you all day long, granted that you have the 2 mana to use on it. Here's Cabal Coffers. It doesn't actually tap for any land on its own, but you can pay 2 colorless and tap it to add black to your mana pool for each swamp you control. And this is particularly good with the last land that I wanted to show, Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. So Urborg makes all your lands swamps in addition to their other types, and this lets you pay 2 colorless and tap it to get black, that much black to your mana pool for each swamp you control. So if you have, this is a 3-color deck, but if you have both of these down, and if you just have 20 lands in total on the board, you're going to pay 2 and tap this to get 20 black to your mana pool. So these 2 cards in conjunction with each other are really, really good. Okay, so that concludes my Sedris the Traitor King EDH Deck Tech Part 2. Basically, the win condition of this deck is, just to, just have fun, basically. Reanimate creatures from your graveyard, from your opponent's graveyard, and just, beat face with them. This is a really fun deck to play. If you like stealing creatures from your opponent's graveyards, or if you just like, feeling like a necromancer and resurrecting creatures from your graveyard, Sedris is a really fun general to play. I've actually made quite a few changes to this deck over the past couple weeks before I did the deck tech for this video. But yeah, I really like playing Sedris. He's really fun to play. He's actually a deck that I built not too recently, but I have made quite a few changes to it, because before, I did say before that I am not really a combo player myself, but I built this deck as a combo deck with a bunch of other cards in it, and it just wasn't really fun to play, to try to always get the cards that I needed on the board to essentially just go off in a single turn. It just wasn't that fun to play. So, I retooled this deck quite a bit just to make it, a straight-up Reanimator style deck. And I have to say, once I've done that, it has become a lot more fun to play. I really do enjoy playing this deck. It's really, really fun. So, like I said, if you, like Grixis, Grixis-colored decks, you like zombies, you like feeling like a necromancer and resurrecting creatures from not only your graveyard, but from your opponent's graveyard, Sedris is a really fun general to play. So yeah, that is it basically for my Sedris the Traitor King EDH deck tech. Like, comment, subscribe on this video. If you have any suggestions of cards that you would personally put in a deck like this, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below the video. Or, if you've played against Sedris, or if you have your own Sedris list and you want to share that with us, please feel free to do so. We love to hear your comments and your suggestions here at Tap and Turn Gaming. But yeah, this has been Jay with Tap and Turn Gaming, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Like I said, like, comment, subscribe. We really appreciate that. And thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned to our channel for future videos. Thanks a lot.